Richard Falk was born into a New York Jewish family in 1930 and defines himself as an American Jew. He is a Princeton University professor emeritus, former UN Special Rapporteur on Palestinian human rights, and author of dozens of books. At 95 years of age, he's one of the oldest active legal scholars alive. He actively accuses Israel of genocide and specifically vilifies Israel's response to the mass casualty terrorist attack of October 7th. He characterized Israel as a settler, colonial, apartheid-like state sustained by Western protection. The Unfiltered View is a podcast that seeks truth. I am concerned that there is a crime of double standards when it comes to Israel, whereby the accusations against the Jewish state of Israel seem to defy commonly accepted legal and interpretive definitions. Today, I hope to attempt to understand how an esteemed thinker, teacher, author, and human rights advocate provides justice and rationale to claims that clearly violate reason and truth. I do not attempt to do so with disrespect, but rather because I wish to understand those like Professor Falk, who for reasons that suggest a form of self-sabotage may be guilty of stoking the embers of anti-Semitism and the legitimacy of the nation-state of Israel, and who seem to avoid the truth of the real source of the continued victimization of those who identify as the Palestinian people. I quote Viktor Frankl, "From all this, we may learn that there are two races of men in this world, but only these two, the race of the decent man and the race of the indecent man. Both are found everywhere. They penetrate into all groups of society. No group consists entirely of decent or indecent people. There are those whose actions and efforts seek truth and pursue peace in sincerity. And then there are those whose hypocrisy prompts hatred and war against a backdrop of human rights and peace. I will let you decide in which camp our guest, Richard Falk, belongs. I am Israel Ellis, and this is The Unfiltered View. Thank you for watching and waking up. Our currency in this world of independent media is your engagement. Don't be shy. If you appreciate the effort of this podcast, please subscribe to this channel. Share this episode with your network. If you like it, then like it, and comment. Your feedback is important and helps me to learn. Welcome, Professor Falk, and thank you for joining me today on The Unfiltered View. Let's get right into it. Professor Richard Falk, you are speaking to us today from California. You look great for a young man.
It's the sunshine out here.
Right. Look at 94. Wow, you've seen so much.
Next week, it'll be 95.
Unbelievable. That's amazing. As we say, kol hakavod. It's great. Hopefully. So Richard, thank you so much for joining me, on the Unfiltered View today. This is really, you and I were just discussing before we got on about dialogue and the importance of dialogue today. Can you repeat what you were telling me?
Well, I feel that it's a time when the search for reality and the truth needs to take precedence over various forms of state propaganda, manipulating what is true in order to serve a political agenda. And in the process, we undermine, particularly here in the U.S., truthfulness, and that undermines trust. And democratic society really depends on that combination of trust and truthfulness.
Is truth subjective?
To some degree, I think people have different truths based on different perspectives on their life. And I would distinguish that kind of fundamental knowledge issue from the conscious manipulation of the facts in order to create a particular impression or to do what I feel both the U.S. and Israel have been doing, which is to try to divert attention from the facts relating to the Gaza. The
conflict. How's the word conflict work?
It's a little too neutral for me, but
okay.
It implies an equivalence that I dislike using the terminology of either conflict or war, because I think that distorts the asymmetry that is characteristic not of conflict, but of a violent oppression.
Well, Professor Falk, Richard, as you've allowed me to call you, and you say because you're from California, you like the casual, so I'm going to keep it casual. I'm not, you are a international expert, an expert in international law. You're been a professor at Princeton. I mean, I stand as a very small minion in your shadow, and I don't claim to have the capacity or the knowledge, and especially the wisdom. But when I look at truth, just simply put, I look at it as a derivation of facts, evidentiary by what I see with my eyes. And so today, what I want to do on the Unfiltered View, is I want to talk about these things and these views you have, and I'm going to come back. I'm going to come back to truth. I'm going to come back to the idea of fact-based truth. So we kind of got into it. You kind of, started getting into it. In your own words, can you describe your position on Israel today?
Well, I distinguish between the Zionist ideology and movement and the Israeli state. I think the two have become, in my mind, and as you defer to me on law, I should reciprocate by deferring to you on the nature of Israel. I'm speaking as an interested outsider. It's a long time since I've been in Israel. And
when was the last time you were in Israel?
It was probably 2013 or 14.
Okay. So a lot, not a long time in terms of your life on this earth, but certainly a period of time, and a lot has happened since then, and a number of things have taken place. But go ahead. How would you, again, what is your sort of view of Israel, and what is your viewpoint, and why?
Well, for one thing, I think that the response to October 7th, Hamas-led attack, was from day one motivated by a complex agenda that extended beyond security. I had this suspicion ever since the Netanyahu coalition came to power in the beginning of 2023, and seemed to set the settlers free to engage in what I would call promiscuous violence on the West Bank, more or less green-lighted by the government.
Isolated incidents. Would you agree? I mean, we're not talking about a national program of, violence. We're talking about isolated incidents by extremists. Something which I don't think anyone approves of.
Well, but the reaction to it seemed to me to be one that was basically either neutral or supportive. And then if I'm sort of shaky on the dates, but at some point the the cabinet minister in charge, who was a part of the ultra-right coalition, issued lots of weaponry to the settlers.
Well, yeah, but regardless, yes, there were incidents that things have happened. But you mentioned October 7th, and by no means, I mean, would that justify anything near that? Tell me about your views of October 7th. How do you view that act, that incident, that event, that horrible event?
Yeah, it's a horrible event, but it was preceded by horrible events.
But you're justifying. Would that be a justification?
No, but it's an explanation that you need to take into account the context. And the context includes a long period of blockading Gaza, including not allowing the entry of rather innocent civilian goods and products, which make life a little bit better on a daily basis.
Richard, I find that to be a bit of a generalization. I mean, you haven't been there during this period of time. There have been several peace initiatives that have gone on back and forth. There's no question about it that there's extreme situations and there is complexities in terms of what happened and what could have happened and how it happened. But I want to get to the point of October 7th, because when you're talking about it, you're talking about it in terms of almost like it's an excuse, like it's excusable, like it was understandable how this thing could happen. I would like to understand your view, your impression of October 7th, the day itself. I would like you to tell us how you feel about what happened on October 7th.
Well, I was shocked by the initial, somewhat exaggerated accounts of what did happen.
Did you say the word exaggerated?
Yes.
When you say exaggerated, are you saying that the media, the public media reporting of October 7th was exaggerated?
Yes, and encouraged by the control over the public discourse that Israel has exercised with great skill ever since.
You're aware. You know what a GoPro is, right? Camera. Yeah, it's a small camera that you mount on top of your head, or you can put on your lapel. You know what those are, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And I just want to understand, because again, I'm fact based, and just about every terrorist, and I call them terrorists, who came into who penetrated the border by force, had one of these GoPros. In fact, it's unbelievable. The evidence. It's probably one of the first times where a act by one party films and provides evidence of their crimes against humanity. I don't see how you can say it's exaggerated, since all of the media, all of the recordings filmed in real time as terrorists, and I hope you don't mind my being graphic, but as they shot, killed, mutilated, raped, brutalized, chopped off the heads of babies. I don't see how we can say that's exaggerated, or that is. It is what it is. I mean, the facts are there. The evidence is there. They recorded their own inhumanity.
Well, a couple of things. First of all, Israel as a government has refused to have a independent international investigation of what did happen on October 7th. And there is every reason to doubt the official version. It was revised in various ways.
I don't think it's a version, though. I think this is actual footage, undisputable footage by any interpretation of, no matter who you are. I mean, this is actual evidence of what took place on October 7th. How could you possibly say that it's been exaggerated or that any kind of organization or body manipulated this? And I don't say this to be attacking, Richard. I say this just for clarity over here. What happened on October 7th was clearly documented, not by the defenders, but by rather the aggressors who did this for some nihilistic reason of their own, to show the world what brutality they're capable of doing. So let's not even get into the background or the complexity or who said what said who. This is evidentiary footage that has come into play.
But I haven't been exposed to such footage. And
okay.
Originally, in the first few months after October 7th, the most mainstream media didn't criticize Israel at all. It sort of supported the Israeli narrative.
We're going to bring up some footage of October 8th. We're going to bring up some footage of how the world responded to supporting Israel. There wasn't much support for Israel after it started to defend itself.
Well, of course, you're again cutting out the context.
Okay.
If you put people under siege for a period of since 2007, and you call them terrorists when they resist, and Israel has this famed surveillance capability it takes some extreme, what shall I say, extreme naivete to think that they were taken by total surprise. They were warned by the U.S. over a period of a year. They were warned that week by Egyptian intelligence, and yet Netanyahu did nothing as far as...
So you're saying that Netanyahu allowed October 7th to happen?
He may not have known what was going to happen, but there is every reason to be suspicious of both what happened, what the Israeli response was to what happened.
Okay, let's just say that people knew. There's definitely a lot of questions to be asked, and there's certainly going to be years of independent inquiries that are to happen. Let's just say for a moment, in the horrific imagination that someone actually knew to the extent of what was about to take place. That in no way justifies, in no way does it clear anybody for it to take place. The fact is, again, I'm evidence-based. And the fact is, there's no question in my mind, because I have watched the footage and the documentaries have come up and they have been verified. And I would recommend, sir, to you that you spend some time watching the footage of what happened on October 7th. I have visited the grounds of the Nova Festival. I have, in my book, The Wake Up Call, I talk about walking from the gates of Gaza right to Kibbutz Be'eri and just watching and seeing what the trajectory was of the terrorists that day. I'm just going to take this in a different direction. I just want to ask you a legal question. Cars today have cameras installed on the dashboard of the cars. Are you aware of that? That some cars will have a dashboard camera?
I didn't know that.
Yeah, they do. They have a dashboard camera, and they do this in order to record an accident that might happen.
Yeah,
would you say, right? And then that footage is entered into evidence. Would that be evidence that if you were involved in a legal case involving a car accident and you were to review this footage, would that footage be an opportunity to dispute the facts, or would that support the facts of what happened?
I would say until it's validated that it hasn't been manipulated, it's ambiguous. It's not definitive. I'm not an expert on this sort of construction of evidence.
Let's assume it's validated. Let's assume that some way there is a way to validate that footage. It's usually got a time and a date stamp and what have you. Assuming that this footage is validated, you as a legal professional, as somebody who has been in law for a long time, would this be admissible as evidence when analyzing events that took place and determining fact?
Probably.
Okay, I just wanted to determine that because that's exactly what happened on October 7th, sir. There is footage. That footage has been validated, and that footage has become fact. And there is no question. I don't think you can question what happened on October 7th, please. And I tell you, Richard, in all due respect, it's dangerous, in my opinion. In my opinion, I don't think it's just my opinion. It is dangerous for us to assume that evidence, to question evidence that is fact. I want to ask you a question. This is a very important question. I just watched a tremendous, very powerful movie called The Nuremberg Trials. And at the Nuremberg Trials, they had submitted as evidence footage of discovery of what they found when they entered into the concentration camps. And they showed footage. The Nazis were very proficient, and lots of this was documented, and they found that documentation, that footage, and they presented it at the trials. Do you suggest that footage was factual? Do you think it was doctored? Do you agree with that footage? Do you agree with those trials and what happened and the end result of those trials?
Well, again, you've touched on a complicated set of issues. I am a critic of the way in which the war crimes trials were constructed after World War II. It was a what was called victor's justice, in which the crimes of the winners were exempt from legal scrutiny. And unless you put that into the equation of your assessment, it seems to me you're just socialized into the dominant.
Richard, did the Holocaust happen?
Of course.
Do you believe that 6 million Jews, 6 million people were slaughtered and gassed and cremated, and that the Nazis had nearly 1,200 concentration camps? Do you believe that is fact?
Well, I don't know that statistic that you just mentioned, but
okay.
I've questioned. I've questioned the way it's manipulated in order to justify the dehumanization of the Palestinians.
But you've called Israel, you've accused Israel using words, the equivalence of words, which I think is, I got to tell you, I don't agree with. That using words like Holocaust and the word Nazi, and you've equated that with Israel's treatment of Gaza, of the Palestinian people.
I didn't equate them. I wrote those early articles as a warning that Israel was heading in that direction of dehumanizing the other and validating that with the language of terrorism, which you've been using, and I don't think it's appropriate. Hamas was an elected government in Gaza.
Elected by how? Elected in a democratic process?
Yet internationally monitored, and many impartial.
Of course, not to mention that they murdered and killed the Fatah, and they killed any opposition. In fact, the day after the ceasefire, they went ahead and murdered 50 opposition members who threatened Hamas's position in Gaza. This is who you're dealing with. You're not dealing with a simple electoral process when you start to murder your dissidents.
But you're engaging in a polemical way of constructing the facts. They're not that one-sided as you're putting it. Fatah was doing a lot of, had a lot of corruption. It did its own dirty deeds. To unravel the reality with that kind of clarity that you have is, from my perceptions, a form of distortion and polemics.
Okay, so I want to deal with facts. And what we've established is that you do, just getting back to the Holocaust, you agree that the Holocaust happened. You agree that 6 million people were murdered, or do you think that's an exaggeration?
I haven't studied that. I accept it. I have never questioned that.
You're an extremely intelligent person with vast knowledge of history, and you've witnessed the world. Let's agree on something. Let's agree. I mean, the reported and the accepted volume of death as a result of the Holocaust tends to be 6 million, the number around 6 million.
Yeah.
Okay. I have to say that I don't think that anyone should use the words Holocaust, the words Nazis, to equivalate, especially to equivalate what Israel, the Jews, are going through, or that this conflict in the Middle East. They absolutely have nothing to do with each other with respect to, and there cannot be comparisons to such a time in life. And I think I really think it's a normalization. If you talk about normalization, I feel that that equivalency itself lends to some kind of normalization where we are reverse engineering the victim status of the Palestinians to reflect the victims of the Jewish people during the Holocaust. And I think that is unsettling to hear that, insulting if at very least, but especially at this time, not even, where there is Holocaust survivors still around. You're born in 1930. Had you been born, you were born in the United States, and I think that was to your good fortune. Had you been born in Europe, you might sing a different tune.
Of course. I don't suggest that my perspective is not influenced by having a comfortable early life where Jews suffered a great deal from fascism, Nazism, and the whole scene as it unfolded in Europe. But I do question to use maybe a provocative word, the Orientalism that was embedded in Zionism from its outset, where it the land without people for a people without land. And that colors I don't want the Jewish tradition to be put in that situation. It was well summarized by the English poet W.H. Auden, who said, "Those to whom evil is done do evil in return." And until Israelis can acknowledge that and repudiate the kind of Zionist ideology that underlies that, it's very hard for them to retain any kind of legitimacy in international society.
I'm glad you brought that up. Israel is a sovereign nation state, according to the UN Resolution 181 that was passed on November 29th, 1947, called for the partition of a British-mandated Palestine into Arab and Jewish states. And the state of Israel came into being officially on May 14th, 1948, by David Ben-Gurion, who was the head of the Jewish Agency and proclaimed the establishment of the state of Israel. In fact, at the time, U.S. President Harry Truman recognized the new nation on the same day, and internationally, Israel was recognized and has since been recognized as a modern sovereign nation state. Would you agree with that statement?
By and large, it was also from the beginning criticized for these racist features that it incorporated.
Okay,
Not everyone.
but I just want to understand something. I just want to establish fact of your common belief, if you will. Israel. Is Israel a nation state?
Yes.
By international law.
Yes.
It is a sovereign country. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Is Palestinian a people?
I think they are accepted as a people. Yes.
I mean, you talk about the Palestinians. You often quote the Palestinian people, and you talk, and I listened to your October 25th address recently in Istanbul, and you speak of the Palestinian people and the victimization of the Palestinian people and the Palestinian state.
And we shouldn't forget that the tragedy of the Palestinian people began not on October 7th, but a century and more earlier. For action to end the genocide and to secure justice for the Palestinian people.
Here we have governments, heads of government in our own country. Mark Carney, for example, a British prime minister. That's the Canadian prime minister, but also the British prime minister and other, leaders have recognized a Palestinian state. I don't understand. What are the legal justifications in doing so? How can you declare or recognize a state that is not a state? And how can you recognize a people who are a people that aren't, to recognize the name or characterize a people of a statehood when there is in fact no legal sovereign statehood that has been established or ever recognized by any international means in terms of Palestine or Palestinians?
Well, again, this is from an academic perspective a complicated issue, because the UN is not the ultimate arbiter of statehood, and its statehood is a matter of diplomatic discretion in customary international law. In other words, there's no prescribed features of what a sovereign state is, including the Palestinians don't have any territorial sovereignty at the moment.
How does one become a sovereign state then outside of diplomatic channels? Would it be by force?
It becomes a sovereign state if enough governments recognize it as such. They have a lot of discretion, and they either can withhold recognition or grant recognition. And if a leadership of a particular group proclaims a statehood and seeks recognition of this sort, that can happen, and it has been happening with respect to Israel and Palestine ever since 1945, and 1948 may be more accurate. And with respect to the Palestinians, it's a very large number by now. I think over 150 governments. So Palestine, in that sense, is entitled to regard itself as a sovereign state, and within the UN, it's been gradually upgraded in recent years.
So as a sovereign state, should the Palestinian people then be independent on, dependent on their own resources, on their own, call it basics of life, that they would be responsible themselves for the basics of life?
Well, you're excluding the degree to which this whole conflict over the territory, long preceding October 7th, is one in which there are competing narratives of what is legitimate and what is legal. And the Palestinians have been made into persecuted strangers in their own land, in their own place.
So in 2005, Israel ceded the Gaza Strip to the control of the Palestinian people. True or false?
Partly true.
Okay. Fine. Partly true. I've got that much. And would you agree that they became autonomous?
No, I wouldn't agree.
Would you say that the Gaza Strip became a sovereign nation state by the fact that they were recognized and that Israel ceded control over to to the autonomous body of whether it be elected Fatah or Hamas, but that Israel withdrew from that territory and gave that territory, ceded that territory over to the Palestinian people? Is that what happened in 2005?
I think it's a one-sided way of putting it. I mean, Israel kept military control over the borders. It is.
Does America? You're in California. Does America keep military control over the border between America and Mexico? Is there a border?
Well, that's a controversial issue here, but there's one thing about keeping people out, defending the border. It's another thing to have that both ways, to control what goes into the territory and controls what goes out.
But you've got two sovereign nation states. If, in effect, by your definition, Gaza became a nation state. So it's a nation state, a sovereign nation state, according to your definition. And you've got Israel being another sovereign nation state. I think either nation state has the right to determine what happens beyond its borders. Does Israel have the right? Does Israel have the independent right to determine what happens within its borders and what happens outside of its borders, beyond its borders? Do they have a right to defend themselves?
No, they do not have a right to use force unless it's in response to an armed attack across their borders.
And wasn't October 7th an armed attack across their borders?
Yes, and they're entitled.
And did Israel use force against such an armed attack?
It used disproportionate force, which is a violation of international law.
How many Gazans were raped and mutilated and brutally just murdered mercilessly in order for that? When does it become disproportionate?
Well, that's not a real fact question. That's you have to analyze each situation.
Okay. But the fact is, but the point is, with respect, Richard, the point is that Gaza, being a sovereign nation, if you want to call it that,
I don't,
attacked Israel, and Israel responded to that. Does Israel have the right to defend itself, in your opinion? Does Israel have the right to defend itself?
Well, you're mixing a bunch of questions. Gaza is not considered a sovereign state. It's considered by international law to be occupied territory. And it's questionable that Israel has a right to exercise self-defense against a territory it's occupying. That's considered It is
according
have a legal obligation to protect and assure the life circumstances of an occupied people. And that occupation extended beyond 2005. It was the Israeli version that you've repeated has never been accepted at the international level.
1 second, but Israel did not occupy Gaza. Israel was not at the time inside of Gaza. They responded to protect their own population. I mean, every country has a right to respond to their own country. What do you think would happen in the United States today, in California? What do you think the view would look like if Mexican cartels took over the government of Mexico and started to repeatedly send missiles over into California? What would happen if you were bombarded with missiles every single day? What do you think the appropriate response would be from the American government?
It's a very hypothetical question. And
I think it's a very real question. You've got one sovereign nation that is attacking the borders of another sovereign nation.
You forget that Hamas tried very hard diplomatically to get a long-term ceasefire with Israel that Israel never even responded to.
Which time did they do that? Because there are at least 8. Okay.
Immediately after the 2006 elections.
So, because I tend to disagree. There were several ceasefire agreements. Each ceasefire agreement was violated by Hamas. Which ceasefire agreement was violated by Israel?
But you're again giving credibility, unquestioned credibility, to the Israeli narrative, which is not what I see as fact-based knowledge.
But I think that your fact-based knowledge seems to be somewhat subjective as well. If you want to call I just find there's a lot of double standard out there. And, I want to talk a little bit about, just moving on from this, is your claim of genocide. You claim that Israel is committing gross violations of genocide against Gaza. Is that correct? Have I got that right? Because I think I heard that in Istanbul, and I've heard that on a series of different talks that you've given.
Yes, that's correct.
Well, why is Israel guilty of genocide?
I'm awestruck that you would ask the question, because
I just want to know, what evidence do you have? Do you personally have that Israel is guilty of genocide?
The Prime Minister of Israel compared the Israeli response to the biblical the biblical language used to describe the response to the I always forget this.
Amalek?
Yes, the Amalek people.
Okay, the Amalekites, right.
In which was one of extermination. Every man, woman, and child and livestock were to be exterminated.
So because the prime minister got up out of anger, he got up and he made an emotional plea. This is why Israel's guilty of genocide. So intent.
And then that was followed by the former Minister of Defense's decree shutting down food, fuel, electricity, medical supplies.
So would you say that Hamas is guilty of genocide? The Palestinian people, they're not. So when they say river to the sea, when they vow to annihilate Israel, when they vow that they will do this over and over again, that is not genocide.
First of all, that's not what they do. They have.
Sorry, I hear it with my own ears.
I've talked to several Hamas leaders.
All right.
And they are persuasive to me, both by way of their intelligence and their commitment to some kind of politics of reconciliation. Which I haven't heard from people that talk the way you do. There's no motivation to have a politics of reconciliation, which the Palestinians have been open to ever since 1988.
Sir, are you saying that the Hamas or the Palestinians, okay, or by which being both, okay, the Palestinian people are completely fractionalized into these different extreme outfits, that they do not proclaim themselves to be a death cult?
They use some language that could be so classified in the past.
So when Netanyahu uses language, I just want to ask you something. When Netanyahu uses language saying that this was an act of Amalek and that we must deal with the Amalekites, then that is genocide. But when Hamas continuously, repeatedly claims to push from the river to the sea to annihilate every man, woman, child in Israel, when they talk about total destruction and annihilation of the Jewish people, that is not genocide.
But that's not what they say. You can find some extreme statements if you...
Okay.
Their leadership.
So you're saying that an extreme statement, that if someone said something that was extreme, it's not really genocide because it doesn't represent the general population. It doesn't represent the agenda of the nation. Is that correct?
Yeah, you have to judge each such statement by its context.
But when Netanyahu makes that statement, it is represented universally. He is suddenly accused of genocide.
Yeah, and he never stepped back.
So we should say sorry. We should apologize for the fact that these guys came over and did what they did. Question for you. 2,200 American lives were lost in Pearl Harbor. And the Americans went ahead and went on to kill 3.5 million Japanese. In fact, over 100,000 Japanese in a single day, in response to the attack on Pearl Harbor. 2,800 Americans died in September 11th. Now, if you include the service people, the incredible heroic efforts of the firefighters and the first responders, that number grows to about 3,500, and that doesn't include the many American lives that were, lost beyond that. America goes on to kill 400,000 people in Afghanistan and Iraq. America was never accused of genocide. Do you think what they did was genocide?
No, I think it was wrong.
Do you think it was a disproportionate response? Do you think that Pearl Harbor, that America's response to Pearl Harbor to defend itself from a foe that was a death cult in its kamikaze way and proclaimed taking over the world. Do you think that was disproportionate? Do you think that the response in World War II to Nazi Germany was disproportionate? Do you think that the response to 9/11 was disproportionate and unjustified and that America should not have acted?
Each of those examples that you give has a more nuanced nature than you're attributing to it. And I deeply disagree with the response to 9/11 that I think was certainly not genocide, but it was disproportionate and ill-conceived, and like Israel, it had a secondary agenda, which was to exert post-Cold War dominance over much of the non-Western world.
Well, I mean, 1,200 people murdered at the Nova Festival and in the incursion between all the kibbutzim that surrounded Gaza from this. That would be the equivalent of 40,000 Americans having been brutally murdered. What do you think? And I don't care from the most moderate president to the most extreme. What do you think that the justifiable response would be, Richard?
Well, I would have hoped that the justifiable response would be to say, we've had enough violence from both sides, and it's time for a peaceful reconciliation.
Let's just say that it's a wake-up call, as you say. But do you not think that we should root out the evil? That we need to root out the murderers? Do you think if somebody is on a murdering rampage, do you think we should stop them?
Well, if you were asked about the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, and there were some murders committed in the course of that, would you condemn it?
What do you mean? Murders by whom?
By the Jews engaged in the uprising.
The Jews committed. I think that was an act of defense. I think that was a very limited act of defense. What would you do if you were corralled into an area and where transports were taking you to the death camps of Auschwitz? Would you just sit there and just go like sheep? Are you saying that people should go like sheep to the gas chambers?
But are you saying that people should accept living in what's David Cameron, a very conservative Western leader, called the largest open-air prison in the world? He referred to Gaza in those terms around in the early 2000s. And Israel changed its view of Gaza. It long before 2023. Soon, the offshore natural gas reserves were discovered.
You've accused Israel of committing genocide. I want to go to the international legal definition of genocide as defined in 1948. 1948 Genocide Convention was defined genocide as acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. It requires specific intent. Includes killing, causing serious harm, deliberately inflicting conditions of destruction, preventing births, transferring children, etc. Does Israel check all those boxes for you?
Not all of them.
Okay, so when you accuse a person of murder, or is there a defining act? Like is there a series of boxes that must be checked for a person to be convicted of murder?
Yes, probably. I mean, murder is treated differently in different legal jurisdictions, and intent is dealt with differently.
Let me ask you a different way then. When someone makes an accusation of something as serious as genocide, is it okay just to have a couple of boxes checked, or do you need to have all the boxes checked?
A couple is enough.
A couple is enough. Which boxes would you say that Israel is deserving of being accused of genocide?
Well, my perception of the genocidal nature of the Israeli response is based on the language and broader political behavior of the leadership and the congruence of that behavior, that verbal behavior, with the combat tactics that were targeting hospitals, schools, the infrastructure of a normal life, making
So is it normal?
unlivable.
Is it normal, by the way, to put military installations underneath hospitals? Is it normal to put strategic military underneath schools, to have terrorist cells in tunnels underneath these public institutions? Is that a normal checkbox when it comes to genocide, where you have to deal with that, when a country has to deal with that? Is that considered attacking a hospital?
But why are there tunnels under hospitals and in?
That's a very good question. Why? Why are there tunnels under hospitals? Why?
Because Israel has subjected the Gaza to oppressive occupation ever since 1967. It was supposed to be temporary.
So there are tunnels under hospitals because Israel has subjected Gaza to oppressive occupation, and therefore there are tunnels underneath hospitals to store missiles, to store armaments, to store tools of destruction, of mass destruction, and that is okay?
You don't use
that's justifiable.
But you don't use in your listing of motivations the word resistance.
So Hamas
why is that absent from your vocabulary?
Listen, it's not that it's absent from my vocabulary. It's because Hamas is not a resistance force. Hamas is a terrorist organization. They've been internationally condemned and labeled as a terrorist organization, not a resistance organization.
But that's a tribute to the state propaganda of Israel that has been subscribed to, at first reluctantly, but more recently enthusiastically, by the U.S. and the liberal democracies of Europe.
So I just by definition of genocide, but Richard, definition of genocide, okay? The population of Gaza had grown significantly. There have been nothing under genocide designation or legal that has been legally can be pinned to Israel doing genocide. I mean, there is a difference between genocide and defense, isn't there? I mean, if I have an aggressor coming after me and I defend myself and kill that aggressor in the process of defending myself, defending my life, have I just committed genocide?
But that's not what happened, in my view.
Okay.
Gaza had been under siege ever since 2007. Before that, Israeli officials at a high level and advisors were saying, we're going to keep the people of Gaza on a subsistence diet
of concrete. How did Gaza get all the concrete to build those tunnels? How did Gaza get all of the arms to build up for the incursion on October 7th? You realize that there were nearly 6,000 trained militants of the Alaska Brigade that came across extremely well armed, each with enough supplies for 5 or 6 days, sophisticated technology. How did they acquire all of this material if they were under siege?
That's a good question. I have no answer.
A miracle. Well, then they weren't under siege, were they? Because the fact is, is they receive water, they receive food, they receive sustainability, they receive electricity. This is not an occupied area under siege. They use that. They use the $1.3 billion a year from UNRWA. They use the $350 million a year from Qatar. What did they do with all that money? Did they build hospitals? Did they build educational institutions? Did they build sustainability for their people? Or did they build tools of destruction? What did they do with all of the money that we gave them, that America, Canada, all of Western civilization that you accuse of emboldening and enabling Israel? I want to know, where did that money go? Hamas was well funded by UNRWA to the tune of about $1.3 billion a year. They're $1.6 billion.
A very contested point.
I don't think it's contested. Qatar admits, I've seen it with my own eyes. Suitcases of cash going over
there's a suspicion that when you're as clear about the narrative as you have been, you're not engaging with the even if you don't agree with me, there's a lot of fuzzy, unclear elements, and the wrongs are not all on one side. You see no wrongs in Israel's behavior.
I'm trying to deal with facts. From the beginning of this conversation, Richard, I'm trying to deal with, do you disagree or do you agree that Hamas received international funding over the last several years?
When you use the word terrorism and refrain to refer to Hamas and refrain from using state terrorism when referring to Israel, in my mind, you're engaged in state propaganda.
Did Hamas receive outside funding? Has Hamas received outside funding from UNRWA, from Qatar, from international organizations? Has Hamas been receiving money over the course of the years?
Yes, of course. I mean,
and what have they done?
I don't know the details. I don't know how.
What have they? Okay, I can tell you because I've researched those details. I can tell you that Hamas has received approximately $1.6 billion budget, okay, from UNRWA, okay, and that $350 million annually from Qatar. But regardless, big numbers, more money than I've seen. What did they do with that money, Richard?
I have no idea.
I can tell you what they did with that money. I've been on the ground. They built tunnels. They purchased weapons of mass destruction. They have built missiles, manufactured missiles. They have favored guns over butter. That is the fact. You don't have to know the details. You don't have to be a brilliant person to observe and to see that Hamas has used every resource that has been given it, every privilege that it has been given by the international community to sow destruction, not to build a nation. So what happened to that money, Richard? Would you agree? Is there any agreement that you can give me that Hamas used this money, did not use this money for the betterment of its people? It favored guns over butter.
Well, I think that the Hamas was elected primarily because it was perceived by Palestinians to be a legitimate movement of resistance. And the Palestinian Authority set up under the Oslo diplomacy was seen as collaborationist. That distinction explains how they used the money. Their mandate was a mandate of resistance, a mandate of liberation, if you want to put it.
So you think that justifies taking that money and using it for guns instead of butter?
I don't know what the arrangement was with the donors and whether the donor.
Come on, UNRWA has a public disclosure statement of what that funding is supposed to be for, and it wasn't used that way. And the international community put their blinders on, and Hamas built tunnels. They manufactured weapons. They built up the armaments for the sole purpose of attacking Israel.
No, for the sole purpose of resisting Israel's
You call what they did on October 7th resistance, sir?
Yes, it was motivated by resistance.
Sorry, you call brutally, outside of any international law or anything like that, but the way that they conducted themselves. How could you, in all your years on this earth, look at what happened on October 7th and call that resistance? It's outright terrorism. It's outright murder.
It included acts of violating laws of war and so on.
Listen, Richard, call it like it is. Call it like it is. You're international law humanitarian. I want to ask you something. Kidnapping people and using them as human shields and using them and commoditizing human life to negotiate with, is that acceptable? Or is that also an act of resistance?
Of course, if you look at it in isolation, it's totally unacceptable. But unless you look at it in relation to what Israel has done over the years, over the decades.
Okay. I don't know, Richard, all due respect, I find that comparison to be unacceptable. Is rape an act of resistance?
No, of course not.
Is the beheading of babies an act of resistance?
That's been discredited in the West.
Oh, come now. It's evidence, evidentiary, evidence, footage of things like of rape and this type of brutalization. But we can agree.
I would suggest you not use it. It has no credibility.
Okay. All right. How do you expect peace to happen when the Palestinian leadership continues to sponsor a pay for slay policy that essentially encourages ongoing terrorism, that the Palestinian Authority will not recognize the state of Israel, and that the Palestinian Authority fills its educational curriculum with propaganda that demonizes the Jewish people? Well,
your question is so loaded with what I consider bias and
does the Palestinian Authority have a pay for slay policy where they pay terrorists pensions for life when they commit acts of terrorism?
That has been alleged. I don't know that for a fact.
That isn't alleged. That
it's not correct. Yes, I don't know the details, but it's
so. This is verified. This is verified and documented, and I don't know what more we can do to get it outside of sort of, I don't know the details, to sort of agreeing on the fact that this is actual truth, but it is actual truth. With respect to you, I just feel like that there seems to be, from your end, a continuous bias about sort of these things. You're not willing to. I can accept you've got claims against Israel. I've got it, but I'm trying to establish that there are two. I even hate to use the word sides because I don't think there's sides when it comes to terrorism. When it comes to terrorism, you delegitimize yourself and you remove the possibility of being a side. But in this case, I'm going to make an exception, and I'm going to say that there are two sides. Okay, there are two things going on here. You've got it's not that you've got some innocent victimized people who are being victimized by another party. There's a reaction and there's an action. There's an action and there's a reaction. The Palestinian Authority is not innocent in what it does to do with Israel. I don't think that they are a valid, viable partner that acts in good faith. We've talked a lot about sort of what's going on with Israel, what's going on in terms of Palestinians. And I feel that it's possible that, is it possible that you're harder on Israel because it's a Jewish state? Not out of anti-Semitism, but rather out of some complex relationship that you may have with your own Jewish identity. Does that enter into this?
I don't think so.
Okay. Would you have a judgment about Hamas or the Palestinian Authorities? Do you think that, can you judge them?
Yes, to some extent.
Richard Falk, I want to thank you very much for joining us on the Unfiltered View. It's a place for open dialogue, and we appreciate you coming on board. You are the voice that is out there accusing Israel of various things, of genocide, of occupation, of colonialism. I don't know how we did today. We'll let our public answer that and judge that. But I would say that perhaps, Richard, it's time for another trip to Israel. It's time to go back to your roots. Go back to your roots. Feel the love, man. Feel what's going on there. When you want to compare armies, you want to compare morality, I think I'm going to put my money on Israel. And I think that Israel has the right to defend itself. The Jewish people have a right to survive. And I think we got to stop apologizing for our very existence. I think it's okay to fight back. And I think that it's unfortunate. But the one thing that I'm going to say, Richard, is that we often tend to find it easy to accuse Israel of these things, but I think it's misdirected. I think the real accusation is to accuse Hamas of what it does to its people, to accuse the problem with Gaza is not Israel. The problem with Gaza is Hamas, is the Palestinian Authority's mandate of hate and incitement of violence. The problem in a world of terrorism is the terrorists. It's not Israel. It's not the people who've been fired upon. Thank you very much, Richard Falk, for attending the Unfiltered View. Do you have any final statement that you'd like to make, that a legacy you'd like to leave with us?
Well, thank you. It's been instructive to me to talk with you, but we do deeply disagree. Until Israel scrutinizes itself, particularly Zionist ideology and state terrorism.
I just think that comments like that, Richard, comments like that are dangerous. We have to be responsible in how we speak and how the claims that we make, because just like you're saying that I've asked you questions where you haven't been able to substantiate the answers through lack of evidence or lack of clarity, it seems that you are making claims also against Israel with the same lack of clear clarity and of evidence to the contrary. And I think that you might want to rethink that. You may want to go back and take a look at that.
Okay. I'll do that.
Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us today. I am Israel Ellis, and this is The Unfiltered View. Thank you for watching and waking up. Our currency in this world of independent media is your engagement. Don't be shy. If you appreciate the effort of this podcast, please subscribe to this channel. Share this episode with your network. If you like it, then like it and comment. Your feedback is important and helps me to learn.